with Dr. Cloud coming in by video clip that we put together till late last night. And my clock in here is a minute and a half fast. No, slow. My mistake. Slow. So Bobby's keeping me on time up there. Thanks for starting the countdown, Bobby. I was waiting for it to say 10 after, and you started it at 9 after, but which was really 10 after. So welcome to the Auditorium class here at Hendersonville Church of Christ. I'm Stan Wilson, and normally I'm joined by Rodney Cloud, and we still will be joined by Rodney Cloud this morning. We will pretty much just stick to our script because it went a little differently this week. We worked until late last night, and then I edited 15 different video clips to put in this morning, and he wanted to start by giving you an update on Juanita. So here we go.
Well, good morning, Hendersonville. As you've just heard from me starting class, we're going to try this again. We got great compliments from several people in class last week in the auditorium and also online that all of this work that Dr. Cloud and I have been doing to edit and keep him involved in class while Juanita is recovering and actually anticipating surgery too, that it's been worth it. So, Dr. Cloud, that's great news. That's why we're here together again this morning in this format. But how is Juanita?
Well, let me say Boker Tov, which is those who've been to Israel. Remember, we did that every morning as we met the guides. Good morning in Hebrew. Juanita is kind of tired and weary. She's had a tough day today, and but where we are in the situation, the 3.5 days at the hospital, and then we set different appointments. So this past Monday, she met the vascular surgeon in Franklin here in the hospital. And then Tuesday, she was downtown at the main hospital for 5 hours and met both the people who will be actually doing the surgery, the two doctors. And now we're waiting for one more test, we'll be told Monday, and then the surgery, and can't come too soon. So thank you for your prayers. Thank you for the cards. Thank you for everything you do. We have neighbors that have jumped in to help us. One of our neighbors is putting our mail on our back breezeway every day, and et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, so thank you for all of that.
Well, thank you for the update, and let her know, I'm sure she's listening right now as well, that we are continuing to pray for her, and the whole congregation has been made aware of it. And we look forward to getting this behind all of us and getting her back on her pew so that she's back where she's supposed to be on Sunday mornings next to you.
That'd be great.
All right, so what he didn't tell you is that she got to go get her hair done yesterday, which to you ladies, you know that's a routine thing you do, right? So that means she's feeling a little better. Yeah, India's over here doing big yes to me. And I got a little overexcited yesterday. I said, well, do we even need to record? I mean, if she got her hair done, or would you guys maybe have enough energy to make it? And he said, oh, no. 1 hour while she's up, and then she gets so tired she takes a nap. And I said, okay. So it was wishful thinking on my part. But the other thing he didn't tell you is that the surgery has changed a little bit. It's going to be a synthetic heart valve and not a pig or bovine heart valve. And I guess that's good news. Seems like if it's made with purpose and intentionality, it'll do well. So that's everything we know at this point, and hopefully by next Sunday we'll know even more. So let's pick up where we were last week. Remember, we had that strange lesson about Samuel speaking to King Saul through the medium of Endor, and Samuel giving King Saul some news that we would think King Saul would heed, because he said, as for you and your sons, you'll be with me tomorrow, which would be in Sheol. And so bring that back up in your mind, because the story is going to continue here. We're going to say that this is somewhere around, circa, there, the abbreviation, around 1010 BC. And we're looking this morning at 1 Samuel 29, verse 1 through 2 Samuel, verse 5. Now, obviously, we won't have all those verses on the screen, or we would never get finished in time to get you out of here at 11. But that's the content that we're going to cover this morning between slides and videos. And we're also saying that we believe, and this is in one of the video clips later where Dr. Cloud expounds on it a little bit, we believe that David's somewhere around 30 years old. And we'll show from the text why that seems to be the case, He could be 29, he could be 31, but somewhere right around 30 is what we're suggesting that he is at this time, that all of this part of the narrative that we're looking at today is taking place. And so we're going to start in 29, verses 8 through 11. David says to Achish, remember he's with Achish, he's gone to the land of the Philistines. Last week we showed that. He's kind of doing what he did before when he acted mad and crazy and went somewhere he could be protected from Saul. He's got that game plan up again. So here he is with Achish, and he says, what have I done? Why have you found in your servant what have you found rather in your servant from the day that I first came into your presence until the present time, that I shouldn't go and fight the enemies of my lord the king? What he's saying is Achish has just let him know that he's not going to go fight at Mount Gilboa to fight the Israelites. And he's still doing this charade, I guess is probably a fair word to use, that he's a vassal to Achish and that he's fighting for the Philistines, and he's upset that he's not going to fight for the Philistines. And Achish answers him and says, David, I am convinced that you are as reliable as the angel of God, which that's interesting. That's not Yahweh's name there, it's actually Elohim, so it actually is the construct God. But still, it's interesting for Achish to say that. We don't know if he's talking about David's God or if he's talking about the Philistine God. But in any case, he says that he's as reliable as the angel of God. However, the leaders of the Philistines have said he must not go up with us to the battle. So you've got the king convinced that David means what David says and believes David, and you have the men that David would be working with or fighting with saying no. And he says, so get up. He says to David, so get up early in the morning along with the servants of your Lord who have come with you. And when you get up early in the morning, as soon as it is light enough to see, leave. In other words, get out of Philistia, get out of Philistine territory. So David and his men got up early in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines, meaning going back to Ziklag. But the Philistines went up to Jezreel in order to go into battle. So this brings us to Mount Gilboa that we mentioned right at the end of class last week, which is where that map was showing us that the battle lines were being drawn. That's where the Philistines were headed with the maroon or red lines, and that's where the Israelites were headed with the green line. The Philistines prepare to invade Israel, and Saul and his forces gather at Mount Gilboa to repel them. Although the response he received from the ghostly figure of Samuel at Endor has left him very frightened. Now, this is a paraphrase, obviously. This is what Dr. Cloud and I are saying. It does not change his war plans. Listen to some of the questions and comments here that we discussed, because I asked Dr. Cloud a question about this.
Well, as you just heard, this is what ends up happening simultaneously. Mount Gilboa is going on, and also in a minute we're going to look at Ziklag that's going on because David's not going to go to Mount Gilboa. But the Philistines prepare to invade Israel, and Saul and his forces gather at Mount Gilboa to repel them, although the response he received from the ghostly figure of Samuel at Endor that we talked about last Sunday has left him very frightened. And it does not change his war plans. But Dr. Cloud, wouldn't we think it would have changed his war plans? I mean, is this just how hard-headed Saul is, or is this what a king was expected to do?
Well, I would think that he just didn't know what to do. He had to go on with what was happening there. As you remember from the scene, he just was so shaken over the whole matter. He just hardly even, wanted to do anything. And his troops talked him into eating a bite and then going out. But he has no other choice. He's got to go out and face the Philistines.
Well, I guess one would assume that he has in the back of his head that this might be what he's going out to, and it might be the last thing he goes out to. Because here's a painting that you had commented you've seen many times, and I'm sure some of the audience has seen before, of just kind of like the massacre that it was. And you would think maybe with Samuel's words echoing in his head, he would have had some pause about joining this battle, but apparently not.
Yeah, he was in a bind. He just had no choice. This came upon him, and there was no turning back. There's a nice shot of Mount Gilboa. We don't know which side they went up, but this gives you an idea. And my belief, my guess, is that Saul tried to get on higher ground so that they could do better, but it didn't work out.
So I thought I had said in that, but it probably got edited out. When I asked him the question about is that what a king's supposed to do, remember when Israel wanted their first king, what they said to Samuel. They wanted a human king to lead them into battle and to be victorious. So in a way, I was not setting Dr. Cloud up, but I was hoping that we would discuss a little bit about maybe Samuel's warning to Saul was not that he didn't, it wasn't that he ignored it or didn't heed it. It was just that as king, he was more about being that leader going into battle, even if he was going into his death. Even more so than in parallel or in comparison, what we'll look at by the time we get to the end of today's lesson and next week, what David does. David has been carrying people into battle, but then there comes a time where David doesn't go into battle, and that is part of David's downfall. So as King Achish expected David and his forces to join him, but their help was rejected by the 4 other Philistine commanders when they gathered to fight Israel, David goes back to Ziklag. And when we go back, that's why I was saying that they're going on parallel. You've got the troops of the Philistines going to Mount Gilboa to fight Israelites, and you got David returning to Ziklag here in a minute, probably at the end of this video clip or the next one. And there's 2 different actions going on at the same time. There's going to be 2 battles going on. David is going to be in battle, but he's going to be in a different battle than the Israelites and the Philistines.
Achish's men who report to him think that David should not go with them, and maybe for good reasons. Maybe they know or suspect that David is not an ally to them, but he has King Achish totally convinced that he would be fighting for the Philistines, but he doesn't have King Achish's men convinced.
Right. If you remember, there are 5 chief cities, 5 commanders or kings, whatever you want to call them. And as they go out to battle, apparently David and his men were in the last group going out, and they see the whole situation as Saul's in front of them. They don't know how distressed Saul is. Now David is behind them, and even though Achish believes he's his vassal, they don't. They're not convinced of that, and so they see David turning on them from the backside while they're fighting Saul on the front side, and it just looks like it's going to be a tremendous disaster, and they just say no, just flat no.
Yeah, and I think he's onto something there too. If you think about what Dr. Cloud was saying, if Achish has been duped but his men haven't, then they may think that Saul and David are the bookends of the army that would end up crushing them in between. And yet I also thought of something else while we were recording, and that is the providential nature of Yahweh. By David not going to that battle and not being in a battle with Israel or for Israel, or if he were to go and try to turn from the Philistines to help Israel, Israel still ultimately loses. Sorry if you didn't know that yet, but you're getting ready to know in just a couple of slots. Israel loses, right? So by Yahweh making sure David wasn't even there, he was out of harm's way. Even though all of this is trusting in God, has to be trusting in God more than trusting in our own plans, because nothing that David wanted to do was David actually able to do in this scenario. So we move to chapter 30, 1 and 2. On the 3rd day, David and his men came to Ziklag. Now the Amalekites had raided the Negev and Ziklag while he was gone. So see, this is why I said there's 2 different action stories going on at the exact same time. They attacked Ziklag and they burned it. And interestingly enough, different Bible translations and also the Hebrew says they burned it with fire, just in case you were concerned or confused about what burns things. But it was burned up is basically what it means. They took captive the women and all who were in the town, from the youngest to the oldest, but they did not kill anyone. That's interesting. All this bloodshed going on in this other battle, and the way the Amalekites, remember we've encountered these people before, all the way back to the days of Moses, right? So they're usually barbaric, bloody people, but they didn't kill anyone. They simply carried them off and went on their way, and then just left Ziklag just in complete destruction.
Okay, you can imagine how relieved David and his men were when they found out they could get to go back home. And so they're elated. And so what we put together here was, they traveled back to Ziklag, But unfortunately, when they get there, they find, as you see on the screen, that the town had been burned down by the Amalekites. And so uh, everybody's gone, and the families have been taken captive, and David's men are really upset with him over this whole thing. They're angry, and they're actually picking up stones.
Yeah, taking up stones he'll come back to here in a second. And we're also going to have a lengthy discussion here on the last clause, the last sentence. But David drew strength from the Lord his God, which I would contend he should have done sooner. And I hope that you'll agree with me here in a minute. Let's think about that. Actually, it's a little disorienting knowing what he's going to say next, and I don't have it all memorized in my head. So I should have read more of this to you. So when they come and he says that it's burned, and David's 2 wives had been taken captive, Ahinoam and the Jezreelite, and Abigail the Carmelite, Nabal's widow. So David has lost his wives that were there, he thought safe while he was gone. He was very upset, and the men were thinking about stoning David, and that's what Dr. Cloud said was the reason they were picking up stones, is that they're now turning on the leader, right? And so the walls sort of feel like they're closing in on David, and what does he decide to do? He decides to consult with the Lord, and that's why I put this on this map. Remember, I think I want to say it's 3 Sundays ago. It might be 4, but I'm pretty sure it's just 3. We talked about 1 Samuel chapter 23, and we looked at that town there, Keilah, and I showed you that story that if anybody ever says, because God knows everything, do we actually have any free will? And David prayed to him. He asked that the ephod be brought to him so that he could discern God's will. God said, if you go to Keilah, they'll give you up. You'll be killed. Saul will pursue you there. Obviously, he will win. So nobody went to Keilah. And then we ended that lesson with, so just because God knows something and knows what the outcome would be doesn't mean it has to happen if we listen to him and we make the better decision, right? Well, you would think that David would have had that in his mind. I mean, good grief, it was only 7 chapters ago, right? But here we are now, and he's doing the same thing. So look at what happens. He says, so then David said to the priest Abiathar, son of Ahimelech, bring me the ephod. So here we go again. He's kind of like, oh, well, we're at that same crucial point where I'm not really sure what to do. So maybe it's time to ask Yahweh. David inquired of the Lord, saying, should I pursue the raiding band? Will I overtake them? Sounds very similar to chapter 23, right? And God said to him, pursue, for you will certainly overtake them and carry out a rescue. So what is going on here? Well, we had that picture, I think, I know, I've done this in my Exodus class too. We had that picture about what the priests wore, right? And here's a little bit more of a close-up, even though the stones are kind of fuzzy. But if you read in Exodus about the details of the tabernacle and the construction of the tabernacle and all of the various furniture in the tabernacle, the last part of the passage, the last part of the section is the priestly garments that are also made with as much care as the tabernacle is. And this is the main one. It's got this breastpiece that has jewels in it. It has these chains that are made of gold that go up to the shoulders and has these things that go on the shoulders. And it's very foreign to us, right? Here in the Church of Christ and in Protestant traditions, we don't think about wearing particular garments other than, I got a jacket on and I'm not wearing a tie today. But you see what I'm saying? Like there's nothing special about any of the things we wear that elevate us over anybody else, right? And we sort of don't really think about it, I don't think, that much when we read this. And if we think about it poorly, we will come to the wrong conclusion. So I wanted to clarify some of that this morning by looking at this ephod a little closer. These are the same precious stones that are mentioned in Ezekiel 28:13. If you read Exodus, you read the construction of the priestly garments, it'll tell you there's onyx and there's topaz and there's jasper, and there's several that, I'm not even sure I really know which ones those are because they're not in jewelry that I think of, today. But Ezekiel 28:13 says the exact same thing. They were found in Eden, the garden of God. So the priest, when making atonement, was to wear these precious gems that were there and symbolized the Garden of Eden when humans were free from sin. Oh, okay, well that's helpful, right? It's almost like an iconic reminder of this is not the way things are supposed to be. Remember how things used to be, and things will get back that way at some point. and you are the person that is in between, the go-between between the people and God and the people, just like Adam and Eve were. The word ephod is even more interesting. It's taken over directly from Hebrew, or we might say it's transliterated, because no one knows how to translate it. They literally put down ephod from Hebrew into English, ephod, okay? Therefore, it's not really defined, nor is there agreement about its design. It refers here to a garment worn by the priests. That's all we know, because when we get over to 2 Samuel here in a few weeks and David is wearing a linen one, clearly it's some sort of material, not just the gold chains and the gold components of it. The symbolic aspect of Aaron's ephod derives from its nature as a costly and intricate golden garment, though, and as such, it is made of materials that in both ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia were reserved for garments that clothed either the statues of gods or, at very least, a select group of high officials, royalty and top priestly ranking people. And we might say, well, this is where we could go off the rails. We could say that if we wore this thing, we're better than other people, or that Aaron is less sinful than the rest of the people, right? But remember, Aaron participated in making the golden calf, so he's not less sinful than the other people. So that can't be it. It's got to be some other reason. And I think what we have to do is, like I often do, and so does Dr. Cloud, we go to the ancient Near East context and say what else was going on around the Israelites that God would do, that they would say, oh, this is us and our God doing what these people over here and their God do, and God's doing it with us. Well, look at the screen. Several old Assyrian and Ugaritic texts refer to a rich and costly garments, according to Albright, who's one of the best archaeologists. He wrote that back in 1941. In addition, certain elaborate and distinctive items known as golden garments, quote unquote, were used in Mesopotamian ritual to drape the statues of deities. This practice endowed the garment with an aura of sanctity, since it was used to clothe the god or goddess in rituals meant to secure the deity's presence and availability. I think those are the two words to focus on that slide. Presence and availability, because that's what God's trying to tell his people ever since he brought them out to the wilderness from Egypt, right? As I'm with you. And how do they know when he's with them? Well, the cloud's over the tabernacle, right? Or the priest goes into the tabernacle to perform the Year of Atonement sacrifices. And then we have to also look at something else. We have to go back and say, well, what about Exodus 20, verse 4? That makes a lot of sense, right? No image of Yahweh could be specifically robed to ensure divine eminence. In other words, no person could be stated as being the representative of Yahweh visually, because Exodus 20, verse 4 says, you will make no graven images, right? You'll make nothing that you tell people this is Yahweh, because we're all Yahweh, right? Yahweh, not any one of us looks more like God than another one does. It's all of us together, right? Does that make sense? So then the priest can't do that either, because if he does that with the priest, he's contradicting the laws that he's telling the people. But the priest closest to Yahweh was so adorned as a way of symbolizing and securing God's presence. That's why he has something on. Not for him to be lifted above the rest of the people, but for him, when the people looked upon him, to remember that God is present with them. Does that make sense? And so that is why the ephod is important. That's why David calls for it back in chapter 23 and also calls for it here. And then they do this discernment. And the discernment, just like the last time, God answers him. Now, I'm sort of surprised that Yahweh didn't say, really? It took till now for you to decide to do this? You've done another one of your plans, and you've lost your two wives, and the city's been burned down, and you've gone over and pretended like you're a vassal to Achish. What if you'd called for the ephod before you did any of that? Maybe things would have gone better. But I don't think he has to say that to David. I think David eventually figures that out.
David is really in a strait. He's really caught between two difficult things. So what he does when he sees his men sort of picking up stones, goes to the Lord. And so Stan's been telling you about the ephod and the communication with the Lord. And the answer is, you go. God has assured David in the communication that he needs to pursue the Amalekites and they'll be successful. So they go southward where the Amalekites lived and come to us the brook Bezor. and 200 of the men are just really weary. So David decides to leave them there, kind of guarding things, and they will cross over this brook and attack the Amalekites. And so they do that, and they recover their families, and he and his men return to Ziklag. Uh, and they still don't know exactly what's going on. They're going to find out.
So what about Mount Gilboa then? What's going on there? So now we've moved over and we're looking at Ziklag, right? So we got these two scenarios going on. The chapters sort of go back and forth. And so we return to Mount Gilboa and we look at what's going on in that scene. And it's on the third day after David's arrival in Ziklag that he learns that the Philistines have just completely routed Israel. And they've just decimated the Israelites. And then he finds out that Saul and his sons have been killed. And we see that from 1 Samuel 31:1. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled before them, and many fell slain on Mount Gilboa. And it doesn't explicitly tell you there who it is, but we know in some of the other verses that we'll look at here in a second that killed during the battle were 3 of Saul's sons, and your scripture will list all 3 of their names. Dr. Cloud's going to say here in a minute, we'll get the third name a little later. For whatever reason in this part of the narrative, the third name is not really brought in much. It's really just focusing on Saul and his son Jonathan, the prince that would have been the heir. And so Saul's sons, one of which was his beloved friend Jonathan, one of David's beloved friends, Jonathan, was also killed. Saul, wounded during the battle, avoided being captured alive by committing suicide. And we see a couple of different renditions of this here. While David is fighting the Amalekites, Saul and the army of Israel face off against the Philistines at Mount Gilboa, and Saul takes his forces up a mountain to take away the advantage of the Philistine horsemen, which was the reason we showed you that current modern day picture of it with the elevation. But he's quickly overwhelmed and surrounded. And in this picture, you can see the armor bearer there in the background, chariot wheels, dead bodies on the ground, a sword that he's inserting into himself. Looks like he's got an arrow in his back. He's got some sort of wound there on the front, and he's bleeding from the armor. And then we go to something more like a VBS picture, that we're accustomed to when we were kids, right? Like these are the only 2 people out there. They found some little area over off the battlefield somewhere, and it's just the armor bearer and Saul having a conversation. Probably not. That's probably just been sanitized quite a lot, right? But the same thing is depicted, which is the armor bearer, when Saul asks him to finish him off, he says no. And when he says no, Saul doesn't want to be captured by the Philistines, so he falls on his sword. So the drawings are a little different. I think this one's more for kids, and the other one's more contemplative for us. But upon hearing the sad news, David and his men mourned and fasted for the slain. It says in the text that David cried until he couldn't cry anymore. I mean, this is sincere. After this man's tried to kill him and hunt him and all these stuff that Saul's done to him, he still sees him as the anointed by God and a human being, even if they obviously haven't agreed. And he's greatly distraught by it. And so David then recites the song of the bow in honor of Saul and Jonathan, and I think you'll find this conversation very fascinating that we have, because after mourning the loss of Saul and Jonathan, David asks God if he should move out of Ziklag, and the Lord informs him that he should. He should move his family and go to Hebron, and we're going to look at that here in this video as well.
Brings us back to Ziklag. And so the men are so torn up because, they had relatives still in Israel. A lot of these people, had defected to David, and this was very sad. So David is going to put together this song of the bow in which he's going to praise Saul and Jonathan.
Yeah, and so I found this very interesting. 2 Samuel, David's response, the song of the bow, and yet the song is not, should I say it's not original to Samuel? It's not, right? It's original to the book of Jasher, or the scroll of Jasher, because that's what 2 Samuel 1:17-18 tells us, right? And David chanted this lament over Saul and his son Jonathan. And he wants the people of Judah to be taught this song, but it comes from this scroll, or we would use the word in English, book of Jasher, which means the upright one. And I did a little investigation and study for us that it's a lost source book of early Israelite poetry, but it's mentioned in Joshua 10, and it's mentioned in 2 Samuel, where we are now, and it's also mentioned in 1 Kings by Solomon in his prayer of dedication to the temple. So this is something I wish we had, but we don't know anything else about it, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, it's a little mysterious. There are different views. One view is that David actually composed this lament, and it ended up later in the book of Jasher,
Hmm.
and therefore the when Samuel, First and Second Samuel, are being put together, and in other places that you cited, then the the writer at that point, or the editor at that point, uh, refers to it. That's one of the views. The other view is the one that you stated, uh, and it could be very well that David just knew this because of all of his dealings with reading and writing and all of that, and he applied it to the situation. So we don't exactly know, but we do know that uh, David wanted this lament uh, taught to the people of Israel, people of Judah. It actually said the people of Judah, because they're the ones right now that are really grieving and mourning all those. I'm sure there's a lot of grieving up north too.
So I would just add to that when we read in the New Testament, John's account of the gospel, he tells us that this is enough for us to believe, right? There's plenty of other things that happened. It's interesting, I tell my students all the time, the best way to interpret the Bible is to use the Bible to interpret itself. And so when we see something like this, that there is something outside the Bible known as this book of Jasher, we shouldn't get upset that we don't know about it. We should just recognize that that's an example of what John was talking about when John said, this is enough for you to believe, but this is not the totality of everything. Because the book of Jasher is not in our, it's not scripture, it's not in our canon, right? But obviously it's referred to in 3 biblical books that we have. So I thought that was an interesting conversation to noodle through. The thing that Dr. Cloud was leading us to was, okay, he focused there on David being in Judah, not in Israel, because he's crowned king in Judah first. And why Hebron? Why did God say, yeah, you should leave Ziklag and you should go to Hebron?
He would bring back the spoil and what he didn't need to survive on. He would send to different cities throughout Judah. Some of those cities we don't even never had heard of before. But the main city that he sent the goods to, the spoil to, was the city of Hebron. So he's kind of feathering his nest for the future. He's making these people happy that he's destroying their enemies. So you remember David, and said, and my estimation is in his late teens, maybe 20, maybe 21 when he kills Goliath. So we're talking about 9 years later. So now God instructs him to go to Hebron, where he is going to be anointed.
Yeah, and I found that very interesting because the narrative is so logical, right? He's been running from King Saul. We've mentioned in this class before that you sort of had 2 kings for a little while, not necessarily as far as the people knew, but God had Samuel anoint David as the next king after Saul, even though Saul's king reign had not come to an end. Well, now it has, and as soon as it does, Judah is ready to make David king over Judah, which seems to be the logical step, seeing as how Saul's out of the way and there would be no treasonous challenge here.
Yeah, I think he said right, and there was a pause. So
He would bring back the spoil and what he didn't need to survive on.
sorry,
would send-
we went backwards. All right, we already saw that clip. So I wanted to bring this into play here. I wanted to bring in the gospel according to David, because we told you when we started this class, we weren't just doing David's story just for the sake of doing David's story, even as awesome as that is, right? We're trying to tie it in to how it foreshadows the good news that comes in Jesus, because Jesus is from the lineage of David, called the Son of David, a member of that dynasty that God sets up with David. And I think we start to see that here. I think we start to see it because even though David is a sinful person and broken and makes a lot of terrible decisions, he is a king the people recognize is better for the people than Saul was. He's got the people's best interests in mind. He does things from the heart that he's a sincere person. Yes, unfortunately, he kills people. That's hard to justify, right, at times. But when he's dealing with the people who see him as a leader, he's seen more like a godly leader, I guess is what I'm saying, than Saul was. And so we start to see we start to see his allegiance to Yahweh, his loyal love to Yahweh, and how even though the ephod calling for it, there was a big time in between the two, he does in fact call on God and does everything that God tells him and is obedient. So I think that's starting to show what a human king that is oriented towards Yahweh would look like, even though it's kind of in its infancy compared to what comes along with Jesus.
Put up the Gospel according to David slide here while you were talking, because I think this is a great opportunity for us to look at how patient and loving and gracious Yahweh is with those of us that he works with when we mess things up, and he still works through our messes. And so David is not Jesus by any means, but because he's gone to Hebron, like you've told us, and because he's been anointed as king over Judah, and the people have instantly seen that he is the choice for a leader, for not only in battle, but also, maybe even more importantly, for the good of the people, because he has a heart after God's. And I think that's where we're starting to see the narrative change to why this dynasty will come out of the Davidic kingdom, and Jesus will ultimately come from that. Jesus being a much better human being, obviously, than David, but David showing flashes of what it looks like to be loyal to Yahweh and lead people as a loyal Yahweh follower.
Okay, very good. Very well said. When David does this, when he goes to Hebron, he starts making some great political moves. One of the very first things he does is that he's going to send word to the people of Japheth Gilead that they've done a great thing. Because what had happened, of course, was that the bodies of Saul and Jonathan and his sons were taken to Beit Shan from Gilboa, and they were hung on the wall there, and Saul's head was cut off, etc., etc. And so these people that Saul, if you remember early in our study, these people that Saul had saved from the Ammonites and gone up there and possibly had some relatives there, have done a great thing. They've taken the bodies, they fought their way in, took the bodies and gave them a decent burial. So he's going to commend them for that. So we have a slide or two coming up. Here's one of Beit Shan. You'll see in the next slide in map. So here we are. So it's about 20 miles or so from Japheth Gilead to Mount Gilboa, and a couple of miles less to Beit Shan. So Beit Shan, that's the way we pronounce it in Hebrew, Beth Shan or Beth Shean in English. So these people have traveled to Beit Shan, taken the bodies off the wall, brought them back, and given him a decent burial.
Yeah, and at this point, the Philistines believe that the new king of Judah is their vassal of Achish, and they're thrilled, right? Take what we said about what they might have thought negatively and turn it around for them positively. They think that David is their vassal, and if he's the new king of Judah, then he's going to be fighting against General Abner and the king Ishbosheth in a civil war while they enjoy the plunder from the north. So they think this is great news, and Dr. Cloud talks to us about that here.
So that's what this next slide is trying to tell us. Let me say a word about the dates. Uh, the two most common ways to date David, and it's just a big discussion, but it's to date David from 1010 to 970, or to date David from 1000 to 960. Uh, a lot of the works, Stan and I were talking about it, a man named Teal. A lot of the works, kind of center around 1010 or close by for David. And so we picked out these 2 years because the text tells us that Ishbosheth reigned for 2 years. So when Saul is killed and his other son, especially the crown prince Jonathan, the what's immediately going to happen is that Abner, who survives the battle at Mount Gilboa for some reason, Abner takes Ishbosheth, a son of Saul, probably, again, we won't get into all the details. Remember, a lot of these kings had more than one wife. And many of there were sons that came out of the harem that Ishbosheth was not of the main queen. And therefore, he was about the next in line. He was a step away from that group. And so Abner decides to make him king. And so the Civil War is going to take place from 1010 to 1008 because it tells us that he did rule 2 years. Okay, so what we've got going on is that we've got David established in the city of Hebron as king of Judah, and the Civil War has started. In the north, it all evolves around Abner. And so he takes one of Saul's remaining sons, maybe probably by a concubine or someone like that. And this guy's name is Ishbaal or Eshbaal, and he's called Ishbosheth ban of shame. And there's a long story behind that, but he's called Ishbosheth in Samuel. It's called Eshbaal other places. And so anyway, he's got the northern tribes under him. Abner wisely says, Gibeah is way too close to Bethlehem and Hebron, and where David is. And so he goes across the river and establishes the capital there at a place called, meaning the two camps. In this process, and we're making a very quick summary of this process, there's one of David's nephews named Asahel, whose big brothers are Joab and Abishai, two of David's main warriors. Remember Abishai from 1 Samuel being on top of the hill with David, and they go down and get the spear of the jug. And so anyway, the battle is a disaster for the north. Israel loses 360 men in the battle. Judah loses Asahel, who's killed by Abner, and 19 other men. But remember, these are relatives of David. These are nephews of David, these three that are mentioned. And so Asahel is taken back and buried in Bethlehem. And this next slide we have for you shows you the division of what's happening. It's a map kind of dealing with the Philistines too, but don't worry about the Philistines. Just worry about the north and south. So that green is going to become the northern 10 tribes, roughly speaking, and Judah and Simeon are going to be the two southern tribes. Benjamin later will be identified with Judah, but right now that's not the case. So this shows what's happening. It also shows you, go back one shot there, and it also shows you where Machanaim is. If you'll notice, Machanaim is right above where it says Gilead, right there. So the war is now full-fledged. And so it says a long war. Well, two years can be a long war, but basically the war is being carried on by Joab and by Abishai, are the main ones fighting on David's side. And meanwhile, David is having babies. So sons are born to him there in Hebron, and three are key to the future. So when we come to this, I think the next slide will be the chart.
Well, well, yeah, but I want to say one thing here. So the way you worded this was David handles other matters. But this is, of course, leading up to when we're going to get back to a subject that many of our listeners are very familiar with, and that's David and Bathsheba, right? This mindset of not going out to war, the king was supposed to go out to war. That's why Israel wanted a king to begin with, was to lead them into battle and be victorious. And all of a sudden, because David's life is valued so heavily by his men, they tell him, we can't afford for you to go out to war, because if we lost 100 men, that would be bad. But if we lost you, it would be worse. And since they're not letting him go fight anymore, he's finding other things to occupy his time, as you mentioned.
Right. And very quickly, just without going into great detail, what's important on this slide is here's Zeruiah. This is a sister of David, and she is going to have these three boys. So keep that in mind for the future. Meanwhile, Michal is not on this list, as some call her Michael, but Michal is not in this list, even though she is going to be brought back into his family. David will demand that Abner return her to him if they're going to make a deal. But notice here, these women we've been talking about, Ahinoam, uh, she's going to produce Amnon, who will become a very important player in the next couple of weeks. Then Maacah shows you what David's been doing. Her father is king of Geshur, north of the Sea of Galilee, and so he is surrounding Israel with his contacts. He's going to become friends with Hiram, friends with the different peoples, friends with the kingdom of Geshur, north of Israel. And so this is one of the things he's been doing while his men have been fighting. And she'll produce Absalom and his full sister Tamar. And then another lady, Haggith, we don't know much about her, but she'll have a son named Adonijah who will come into play in the last two chapters of David's life in First and Second Kings.
All right, I know we're over time here. Let's see if we can push through this just a little bit. So Israel comes together and decides, the whole reason, in case you were confused, and I doubt anybody was, but the civil war is the civil war between Saul's old men that don't want David to be their king, and Judah, who does want David to be their king and already has made David their king. And ultimately, Israel kind of comes to its senses, and they gather at Hebron, and they say that they want David to be the king over all of Israel, all 12 tribes. And that comes from 1 Chronicles 11:1, and it also is referenced in 2 Samuel 5:3. So if you don't mind, I don't know what to do here because he's going to lead the prayer at the end. Everybody okay with staying like 3 more minutes? There's only this. Okay, I get it.
So many things are happening that we don't have time to tell you about.
Exactly.
David decides that Hebron is not the best place for the capital. And so after 7.5 years, he attacks Jerusalem, captures Jerusalem, and makes it his capital, moves the capital closer to the northern tribes.
Yep. And so that's the city of David that some of you have seen in Israel, the model city. Then he talks about the city of David here and how that's set up.
This slide with
and let's just go to the last.
Well, again, thank you, Dr. Cloud. We really appreciate, as I said last week, the blessing from God of this technology and you being able to be in class with us. And we're thankful for the update on Juanita. Tell us a little bit about where you're planning on us going next week in this study. And then if you don't mind, you close us in prayer today.
Okay. Yeah, what we are planning to do, because we have to end by November the 30th, and so that leaves us 3 more Sundays. So what we did today, roughly speaking, was 8 chapters. We touched on 8 chapters, covered them. And then next week, it'll be something like 6 or 7 chapters, and takes us up to the David Bathsheba thesis. Actually, the last part of next week will be David Bathsheba. Then the week after, we will deal with Amnon and Absalom's different revolts and things they were pulling. And that'll leave us one Sunday to kind of wrap things up. But we're talking about doing like 6 to 8 chapters each week. So, if you'll bow your heads with me, we'll have a quick prayer. Our gracious and wonderful Heavenly Father, we pray to you, your Son, who loved us, and the Holy Spirit, who is with us to benefit us and help us. We thank you for what you do for us, for the salvation. We thank you for your scriptures, which direct us and lead us and guide us and help us understand your nature. Thank you for all of this information on the life of David. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for the extra 5 minutes. Have a blessed day.